Hi, this is Heidi from My Reading Life, here today to film a review video of a nonfiction book that I've recently read. But before we get into that, I'd just like to say welcome to all my new subscribers and a big thank you to everyone. I've now since exceeded 800 subscribers, which is a serious milestone for me. I'm very excited about it. When I started the channel a little over a year ago, I didn't really have a goal for subscribers, but I kind of thought, well, maybe someday I'll have 500 subscribers. Like, that was the most I could ever imagine having. And so now to have exceeded 800 is a pretty big deal for me. So thank you to everybody who's recently subscribed. And I hope that you continue to enjoy the content that I'm putting out there. So today I'd like to talk about a book that I recently read called This is, and I apologize for the glare on it's because on my iPad, this is called Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter. And the author is Ben Goldfarb. I received this book as an advanced reader copy from NetGalley, so thanks to them for providing me with this book to read. And I first heard about it on Olive's channel over at A Book Olive. And it sounded right up my alley, so I immediately went to NetGalley and requested it and was very thankful to receive it. Now, I'm going to put this down because it's on the iPad and it's not a great cover to see, but this nonfiction book is currently available. It came out at the beginning of July, and it is a natural history of the beaver, that rodent that most people think is probably a pest or a nuisance because of their ability to build dams, cause water to back up, and flood man-made structures like roads and culverts and all these types of things. But as Ben Goldfarb tells us in his book, beavers actually provide tons of ecosystem services. They are nature's engineers, and a lot of the benefits that beavers provide have been subdued by human management, let's say, of beaver. Way back from the beginning of the first explorers to this continent, the North American continent, and the trapping for the beaver fur that occurred at that time period. So Eager goes back in time, picks up the story back in ancient times with the ancestors of today's beaver, and explains from archaeological and fossil records how beavers evolved into the animal that we know them to be today. And so this book mainly focuses on the North American species, which is different than the European Asian species of beaver. But there are some similarities, well, quite a lot of similarities. Evidently you couldn't really tell just by sight between a North American and a European beaver, but they are two different species. But the book does in the end talk a little bit more about European efforts to reintroduce beaver into some of their habitat range, and specifically there's some case studies from Britain. So if that's something that you're interested in, it does touch upon it in certain aspects of the book. The other things that this book touches on, is it explains the history of the beaver, explains how beaver were nearly exterminated in North America due to the fur trade, and that it was actually a strategy of the Hudson Bay Company when Britain and the United States were fighting over who was going to keep control of the northwestern part of the United States. The Hudson Bay Company basically sent in his trappers and said, wipe out the beavers in the northwestern part of the country there. And hopefully that will keep the Americans from really wanting to have that particular bunch of land, and we can maintain control of it. So you can see that a country that probably at one time had, I can't remember the exact number of beavers that this book estimates, but it was something like 400 million beaver or something in North America. It was some incredible number of beaver that probably existed before European colonization. Went down to, like, at one time certain states had no beaver. There were certain parts of California where, because there was no sign of beaver and hadn't been for a long time, that people actually thought that beaver never existed in those places, when in fact that they did, and they had just been trapped out. So the numbers of beaver went very, very low, and subsequently a lot of the ecosystem services that had been provided by this mammal had gone away. And so the book talks a lot about those services that beaver can provide, like flood control, habitat creation, adaptation for climate change, water retention for, in times of drought. If you have beaver in an area and they have ponded up water due to their damming activities, those stream systems are much more able to withstand periods of drought conditions. So the book focuses a lot on the western part of the United States and the benefits that beavers can provide if allowed to live in those areas. Not so much in the northeastern part of the United States, which does have beaver, although it talks a little bit about strategies in the Northeast to manage beaver and to allow them to coexist with humans. So there's a lot of talk, and one of the things that I found very interesting was the whole chapter devoted to a guy called Skip Lyle, who created something called the Beaver Deceiver, which is a structure that's built around a culvert to help basically stop beavers from building a dam perpendicular across the end of a culvert and blocking the flow through that culvert and then subsequently causing flooding over a road. This gentleman has developed a structure that you can build, and it causes the beaver to be unable to build that perpendicular dam and to be unable to block the flow of water through a culvert. And what was interesting to me about that is in the early part of my career, I worked for one of the indigenous tribes here in Maine, and I had gone to a workshop where this gentleman had was teaching tribal employees and tribal members how to utilize beaver deceivers on tribal lands in Maine. So it was really interesting to see a whole chapter devoted to his methodology in this book, and to have firsthand knowledge with that particular technique was pretty cool. So Ben Goldfarb is definitely a believer. He's a true believer. He thinks that our environment and our world will be much better if we peacefully coexist with beaver rather than consistently trapping them out or killing this animal. And I was pretty well sold on his arguments. He has some very convincing arguments for why we should allow beaver to do what they do and to try to minimize the impacts on the human-built world in order to reap the benefits that they provide through their engineering and their just natural habits. It was really interesting, very engaging read. Goldfarb writes in a very popular science style. It's very engaging. It's very accessible to the average reader, no matter your science background. And I think it would be something that anybody would be interested in, especially if you're interested in how humans can coexist with animals, if you're interested in strategies for living with the impacts of climate change. I think you'd find a lot to be interested in this book. So I would highly recommend anybody that's interested in these kind of topics to check out Eager by Ben Goldfarb. And thanks to NetGalley for the copy for review. I hope you're all doing well, and I will talk to you later.